Hey guys, tonight we take a candlelit walk through time to a misty place tucked beyond forgotten hills. A place where scholars didn't chase glory, but gently chased dreams in midday naps and dusty pages. Let yourself drift with the fog as it slips between mossy stones and old oak doors, inviting you into a world untouched by urgency. Here, even thoughts move slowly, like candle wax pooling in silence. Beneath a stretch of autumn gray sky, nestled deep within a sleepy valley, there lies an ancient abbey forgotten by most. The road to reach it is winding, draped in ivy and lichen, lined with stones that remember footsteps long since faded. Mist hangs in the trees like a heavy sigh, and the only sound is the distant toll of a bell. Not urgent, not sharp, just a soft note gently offered to the air. The abbey itself is built from time-worn stone, warmed only by memory and the occasional golden flicker of candlelight. Arched windows rise like quiet thoughts, catching the pale light of day, while narrow doorways creak softly when touched by the wind. Every corner whispers stillness. Every wall carries the scent of parchment and rain. Inside, the scholars do not rush. They move in rhythm with the abbey's breath-slow, patient, undisturbed. They light their candles one by one, the flames dancing but never rushing. No one hurries to finish a sentence. No one watches the clock. Pages are turned softly, and sometimes not at all. It is a place where naps are taken more often than notes. In one room, a scholar has dozed off with a book still open on his lap. A delicate breeze nudges the pages as if reading them in his stead. In another, an elderly monk arranges dried herbs in silence, pausing often to gaze out the window where the mist curls and stretches like a sleepy cat. And so, the rhythm of the abbey unfolds, not in tasks completed, but in the tender rituals of quiet repetition. A cup of warm tea, a sigh beside a glowing hearth, the creak of a chair leaned back in, a thought begun, but never quite finished. This is not a story of adventure. It is a lullaby of stillness, a soft recollection of a place where time forgot to hurry and people remembered how to rest, where the hush of a turning page is as grand as a trumpet call, and where a nap is the most sacred part of the day. So now, let the candlelight guide you deeper. The halls ahead are dim but welcoming. The air is cool, but never cold. And the story, if you could call it that, has only just begun. Outside the abbey walls, the morning mist clings to the damp stones like a familiar companion. Moss creeps across every surface, softening sharp corners as if the building itself has surrendered to slowness. Ivy winds through ancient cracks, trailing down in sleepy loops. And in the quiet spaces between the bricks, spiderwebs shimmer like silver threads of forgotten thoughts. A path of worn cobblestones winds toward a weathered wooden door, its hinges aged and reluctant. It opens with a sound like an exhale, revealing the dim glow of candlelight inside. The scent is deep and earthy aged wood, old ink, dried lavender. Nothing in the abbey is new. Everything has settled into comfort. Inside the central hall, a high arched ceiling holds echoes of chants that haven't been sung in decades. Wooden beams stretch across the air like the spines of long-forgotten books. The space feels cavernous, but not cold. It holds warmth the way a blanket holds a body quietly, consistently, without demand. You may notice the way light filters through the stained glass windows in fractured color, scattering soft reds and greens onto the stone floor. It moves so slowly, you could fall asleep watching it change. And many have. There is no urgency, here only rhythm. The shuffle of slippered feet on flagstone, the gentle tap of a quill laid aside, the hush of fabric brushing past candlelight. Along one corridor, a scholar leans over a desk too low for his back, but just right for his habits. He isn't writing, just gazing at a single word he penned hours ago, as if waiting for it to tell him what comes next. His tea has long since cooled. He doesn't mind. The quiet is enough. Elsewhere, Another rests in a chair, carved long before his time. Its cushions have lost their firmness, but not their charm. His fingers trail across the edge of an open book, not turning the page, simply remembering the last sentence. His eyes are closed now, not from weariness, but from invitation. The Abbey keeps no schedule. There are no bells for meals, no calls to rise. Only one bell ever rings, and even then it does so reluctantly, just once, as a gentle suggestion, never a command. You see, this is a place where naps were not interruptions to study, but part of it, where a closed eye often led to the opening of insight, and where the space between waking and sleep was considered sacred, worthy of soft blankets, warm tea, and uninterrupted quiet. Even the books seem to understand. Many rest open on desks, their pages never closed, never hurried. They hold their words without demand. Their wisdom waits, knowing it will be found eventually. As you walk farther into the Abbey, perhaps you'll feel the slowing too. Thoughts quiet, muscles loosen. The pace of breath matches the sway of candlelight. It is not just a story you're entering. It is a rhythm, a lull, a place between thoughts. A moment you don't need to rush through. Tonight, we begin in this stillness. And as we journey deeper into its corridors and corners, we won't chase a plot or resolution. Only softness. Only the slow unfolding of rooms, of rituals, and of rest. Because in this abbey of fog and flickering light, scholars took naps more than notes, and somehow that was enough. The corridor stretched long and straight, lined with stones so old it had softened with time. Every flagstone bore the memory of thousands of gentle steps, not hurried, not loud, but placed with a calm certainty, as if each footfall was aware of the silence it entered. Nothing echoed harshly here. Sounds were swallowed by the air, which hung warm and still, like a woolen blanket wrapped around a memory. The walls rose tall and narrow, thick with age, and draped in gentle moss where moisture gathered in the shadows. Ivy threaded along the edges of the stonework, its roots tucked deep into crevices left by centuries of rainfall and the slow shifting of earth. A few windows pierced the corridor's length, narrow, arched, and latticed with lead each framing a different angle of the cloister's inner garden. Soft light spilled in through these windows, filtered through dust motes that moved with almost imperceptible grace. The dust didn't settle quickly, and neither did time here. Sunlight came and went like a tide, slow and patient, warming the stones by morning and leaving them cool again by twilight. The corridor was never truly empty. Always there was movement, though faint and measured. Slippers glided across the floor in unhurried rhythm. A robed figure might appear at one end and vanish at the other, leaving behind only the echo of motion. Sometimes 2 figures would pass, each offering the smallest of nods or none at all. Words were unnecessary. Silence spoke just fine. The air smelled faintly of old parchment and rosemary, as if the past had been preserved in every breath. Somewhere far off, a kettle began to whistle low and slow, its steam rising through the cracks in the floor, to remind the scholars that warmth was never far away. Along the corridor's right side, alcoves held wooden benches, their surfaces smooth and curved from use. Some were occupied by quiet figures, heads bowed, not in prayer, but in reflection, or perhaps drifting in and out of thought. A few sat holding pages, though their eyes were often closed. A few had pillows behind their backs, thin and well used, as if this hallway had become their chosen resting place. And why not? There was peace here in this simple in-between space. It connected rooms, yes, but also offered something rarer, a stretch of time where nothing was expected. You didn't have to arrive. You didn't have to leave. You could sit and let your thoughts soften, or simply watch the light move across the stones. One particular window overlooked a corner of the cloister garden, where lavender grew in soft mounds. On breezy afternoons, the scent slipped through the cracks and wove through the corridor like a lullaby. On colder mornings, you might find the windows misted, their panes sweating gently from the difference between inside warmth and outside fog. Sometimes a scholar would draw shapes in that fog with a finger, then leave it to fade like a fleeting idea never meant to last. At the corridor's far end stood a wooden door left ajar most hours of the day. It creaked faintly with the breeze, offering the quietest music to those who walked near. It led to the tea room below the library, though few used it quickly. The hallway was not for speed. It was for slowing down. Now and then, a scholar would pass holding a tray on it, a teapot, a cup, a folded cloth, and perhaps a small bundle of notes. They walked with careful hands, not from worry of spilling, but from reverence. Every movement was part of the ritual. Every step an extension of the calm. Sometimes those passing through would pause at the window alcoves, not to sit, but just to breathe, to look out across the cloister and trace the path of a drifting leaf, to feel the soft chill of stone underhand, to remember that stillness was allowed, that here, in this corridor, even time tiptoed. Candles nestled in sconces lit the passage even on the sunniest days. Their glow never flickered too fast, protected from drafts by narrow panes and thick walls. Their wax pooled slowly at the base, and many of the holders had collected years' worth of layers, tiny frozen waterfalls of ivory wax that no one bothered to scrape away. The scholars, in their earth-toned robes, moved like shadows that meant no harm. You wouldn't notice them unless you looked twice, and even then, you might mistake them for memories. They didn't rush. They had nowhere else they needed to be. Their purpose was found in pages, in sips of tea, in the quiet passing from one end of this corridor to the other. Near the center of the hall hung a tapestry, aged and dulled with time, depicting a moon above an open book. No one remembered who made it. No one knew why it had been hung there. But it remained, as soft and faded as the corridor itself, a symbol not of knowledge to be chased, but of rest to be welcomed. The floor dipped gently in one place, a slight hollow worn by hundreds of years of footsteps. Some scholars stepped around it. Others stepped directly into it, feeling the familiar shape underfoot. It was comforting, like finding the warm side of a pillow that someone once used long ago. There were no clocks here. The rhythm was not kept by tick or bell, but by breath and wind and candle. Morning arrived when the light shifted to gold. Evening came when the corridor dimmed to ash. As the corridor stretches on in memory, and the soft sounds blend together footsteps, wind, the rustle of a robe, you may begin to feel it too. That hush beneath the surface of everything. That rhythm that doesn't pull, but invites. The Abbey is made of stone and timber. Yes, but also of quiet and slowness and naps. And somewhere in that corridor, lit by warm candles and scented by time itself, a scholar rests with a folded blanket and a closed book, dreaming softly of pages he has yet to turn, and perhaps never will. In a small reading chamber, tucked just beyond the eastern wing of the Abbey, the candles burn with a patience that mirrors everything else within these walls. They flicker, but never dance wildly. They melt slowly, like thoughts being gently released from memory into still air. Each flame rests within a brass holder, etched with soft swirls, some worn smooth by time, others still clear, as if inscribed yesterday. This room, often called the silent flame room, is neither grand nor forgotten. It simply exists as it always has, cradled between thick walls, lit only by these ever-persistent candles and the quiet presence of time. The room holds no more than 6 long reading tables, each made from dark oak softened at the edges from centuries of hands. The grain of the wood carries small nicks and scratches, none of them jarring, each one a silent record of contemplative pauses and half-finished sentences. On these tables lie open books, ink pots, feathered quills, and sheets of parchment weighted at the corners with rounded stones. But more than that, they hold small pools of candlelight, glowing gently outward in soft golden halos, as if protecting each reader in a dome of warmth. The flames do not flicker from movement, because the air is still, not stifled, but settled, as if every breath that passes through this space knows to be quiet. Above the tables, long iron arms stretch out from the walls, holding rows of tapers that lean slightly, like they've bowed in reverence. Some have been burning for hours. Others were just lit minutes ago. Yet none seem eager to end. Their wax forms elegant rivers down the sides, curling and drying in soft layers, as if even melting takes its time here. The scent in the room is faint, but comforting. Wax warmed by flame, the dry perfume of pressed paper. A hint of herbs, lavender, perhaps, or sage, carried on the sleeves of the scholars who pass through. Occasionally, a small stick of rosemary or dried thyme is placed near the base of a candlestick, not to be burned, but simply to rest there, reminding the air of where it came from. At any moment, there may be 1, 2, or no scholars in the room. Their presence doesn't shift the atmosphere. Their footsteps are absorbed by the thick woven rugs that soften the stone beneath. Their robes whisper against the chairs as they pull them gently back, then slide into place without a creak. No words are exchanged. Not here. This room holds only pages, ink, and flame. One scholar, draped in a robe the color of warm clay, sits with his back to the window, though no sunlight reaches through today. The clouds are thick outside, and the only brightness in the room comes from the candles themselves. Before him lies a thick manuscript, its binding worn, its pages uneven. He doesn't read quickly. His eyes move slowly, as though tasting each word. Every so often his head dips lower and lower still, until his breath deepens and the words on the page become less important than the space between them. At the farthest table, a much older scholar sleeps with his head resting gently on folded arms. A candle burns just inches from his hand, unbothered, as if keeping guard while he dreams. Its wax has formed a perfect pool around its base, hardening as it cools, like a pond that remembers every ripple. Near the doorway stands a tall wooden shelf holding a collection of small journals. None are labeled. Their covers are all plain, bound in soft leather or cloth. These are not important works meant to be studied. They are notes of passing thoughts, quiet ideas, dreams remembered just long enough to be scribbled down. Anyone can write in them. Anyone can read them. And yet most pages remain blank. Because here, more often than not, thoughts are simply allowed to drift away. There is no fire in this room, no hearth. The candles are enough. They offer light without heat, presence without noise. When one burns too low, it is replaced with another. Not immediately, not urgently. A scholar might notice the dimming of light beside them and slowly reach for a new taper, already prepared on a nearby tray. With the soft scrape of flint and the faintest hiss of ignition, a new flame begins, not to announce its arrival, but to simply continue what the last one began. Some candles are never allowed to burn all the way down. When they reach a certain point, they are gently snuffed with a brass bell, and the wick is trimmed for another day. A kind of ritual care, not for efficiency, but out of respect for the object, for the space, and for the stillness they together create. Outside the room, wind brushes lightly against the stone walls, causing the windows to murmur with tiny creaks. Inside, the flames barely respond. The room holds its own peace. The light within seems to glow not just outward, but inward, softening the sharpness of thought, smoothing the wrinkles of long-remembered worries. Here, you don't think in lines. You don't reach conclusions. You simply dwell, gently, slowly, with a sense that nothing is expected of you. Not now, not soon. One of the candles leans ever so slightly to one side, as though nodding off like the readers nearby. Its wax begins to bend along with it, a slow, elegant bow, forming a spiral as it descends toward the base. It will not break. It will not rush. It will simply melt until it no longer is. And when it is gone, the room will remain just as calm as before. A breeze slips through the window lattice, just strong enough to stir the tips of the flames. They bend, shimmer slightly, and return to their quiet stand. It's almost like a breath, the kind you take just before falling asleep. And perhaps now, you too feel the glow behind your eyes, the softness pooling in your thoughts, like warm wax collecting in the curve of a candle holder. There is no story to follow here, no conclusion to reach. Only the slow flicker of light, the faint scent of herbs, and the whisper of turning pages that may or may not be read. This is a place where even the candles have all the time in the world, where nothing burns too fast, and everything waits for you to rest. Just beneath the library, down a narrow staircase, smoothed by generations of careful steps, rests the tea room, quietly folded into the Abbey's foundation. It is neither grand nor decorated, but the moment you enter, the shift in warmth and scent wraps around you like an old friend's embrace. If the library above held the quiet weight of thought, the tea room below carries the gentle hush of comfort. The ceiling is low, curved in old stone arches like the inside of a clay teapot. Thick beams run above, each one bowed gently from age, yet still strong, still patient. There are no windows here, only sconces lining the walls where stubby candles glow in brass holders darkened with use. Their flames flicker like thoughts winding down. Their light is amber, softening every surface it touches. The floor is made of flagstones laid centuries ago, each one slightly uneven, so that even walking requires attention and gentleness. Over time, the stones have absorbed drops of tea, ash from candles, and the quiet steps of tired scholars. They do not shine, they are not polished, but they remember. A long wooden table stretches down the center of the room, surrounded by mismatched chairs, some carved with ornate arms, others plain and wobbling slightly. Each one has been repaired, perhaps more than once, but none were replaced. That's not the Abbey's way. Things here are not discarded for being old. They are kept, treasured, softened by time. Along the stone walls, narrow shelves hold small jars labeled in neat, slanted script: chamomile, mint, dried rose, lemon balm, wild thyme. A few jars are unlabeled, filled with delicate mixtures whose scents escape even when the lids are tight. These herbs are gathered from the Abbey's garden, picked in slow handfuls, and dried on open screens by the windowsills above. In the back of the room, a cast iron kettle sits atop a small stone stove, warmed not by fire, but by hot coals tended carefully through the day. The water within simmers quietly, not bubbling or steaming aggressively. Its sound is more like breathing an exhale that never ends. Teapots of varying shapes and materials are kept on a shelf above the stove. Most are ceramic, chipped at the spouts, stained inside from years of steeping. A few are made of thick glass, allowing the herbs to unfurl in spirals as they meet the water. Every scholar has their favorite. No two are the same. This room has no rules, no posted hours, and no attendance. It simply exists, waiting for someone to fill it with small rituals. You might arrive and find no one, or you might find an old scholar asleep by the fire, a half-full cup cradled in both hands, untouched and still warm. And though the Abbey values silence, in the tea room, even the silence has texture. It is thicker, perhaps, softer, as though sound itself has curled up to rest. You can hear the gentle clink of a teaspoon, the faintest sigh as someone lowers themselves into a chair, the soft pat-pat of footsteps and slippers crossing from the shelf to the kettle and back again. Sometimes scholars come here not to drink, but just to sit, to place their elbows on the old wood and feel its grain under their palms, to trace the worn circles left by cups decades ago. To watch the candle wax drift slowly down the sides of its holder, then cool in gentle folds, like pages at rest. There is a chair near the far corner that many choose. It leans just slightly, and its cushion is thin, but the light from the candle above, it casts a soft glow across the lap, perfect for resting a book or a pair of hands folded together. Some have nodded off here without ever lifting their cup. The warmth of the room does the work. Sleep arrives slowly, like a cat settling in beside the fire. A small cupboard in the corner holds a collection of handmade cups. No two are the same. Some are glazed in faded blues, others in earth tones, crackled from heat and time. Some have names etched faintly on the bottom, now unreadable. But all are smooth to the touch, and all seem to hold warmth a little longer than you'd expect. The act of preparing tea here is never rushed. First, the selection of herbs, sometimes a blend, sometimes just a single sprig. Then the water, poured not too fast, not too full. The steeping is quiet, with no timers, only instinct. A gentle swirl of the spoon, the lifting of the lid, the first breath of scent rising up like a memory. Sometimes the tea is never even drunk. A cup may be poured, held, and placed aside its steam, allowed to drift upward until it disappears. And that's enough. The purpose wasn't the tea, after all. It was the making of it, the holding of warmth, the invitation to pause. A single shelf above the doorway holds 3 teapots said to be the oldest in the Abbey. No one uses them anymore. Their spouts are too narrow, their lids too loose. But they remain, dusted gently each week, honored not for their function, but for their presence. They've heard more thoughts than most of the books above. It is not uncommon, in the tea room, for someone to fall asleep with both hands around a cup. Their breath slows, their shoulders soften. The room adjusts for them, continuing its rhythms without intrusion. A candle might flicker as they dream. The kettle might hiss a little louder for just a moment. Then all returns to quiet. Above, in the library, pages are turned and thoughts unfold. But down here, beneath it all, something more subtle happens. A softening, a loosening of what was held too tightly, a giving in. And if you were to sit here long enough, you'd feel it, too, that slow unwinding, the heaviness behind your eyes, the warmth in your chest, the sense that here, in this small space beneath so many words, you don't need to think at all. You just need to sit. To sip, or not sip. To breathe in the air of ancient herbs and burning candles. To lean your head back just slightly and let your thoughts do what they will. No one will disturb you. No one will ask anything of you. The kettle will continue to hum. The air will continue to glow. The tea will stay warm, and then warm enough, and then not warm at all. And you may just forget the time, or remember it differently. At the far end of the Abbey, past the tea room's warmth and the dim corridors lined with moss and quiet footsteps, sits a narrow chamber, known only by its scent, the smell of ink-old parchment, and something slightly metallic like time paused mid-sentence. The ink room is not grand. In fact, it could be mistaken for a storage alcove, if not for the desk, the stool, and the steady presence of one scholar who returns to it daily, not out of duty, but because there is something restful in the rhythm of writing what no one else may ever read. The desk is low and plain, its surface marked with faint ink stains and grooves from countless quills. Candlelight pools on its surface from a single taper mounted on the wall, its glow barely enough to reach the corners of the room, yet it's all the light that's needed. This is not a room for reading. This is a room for slow, deliberate inscription. To write here is to breathe differently, to move slowly, not just out of care, but because the space encourages stillness. Atop the desk rests a small round inkstone, its basin worn shallow from years of use. A porcelain water dropper sits beside it shaped like a curled leaf, used to add just enough moisture to revive the pigment. And then there is the quill, always waiting, always ready. The scholar arrives in soft slippers, never hurried. His robe brushes the flagstone floor, and the faint smell of dried chamomile trails behind him from the tea room above. He moves like he's already begun to sleep, eyes soft, steps steady. He lowers himself onto the wooden stool without a sound. The candle beside him wavers for a moment, then returns to its steady glow, as if adjusting to the stillness. He begins by lifting the inkstone and gently tilting it, letting the light catch the dried black surface. He opens the water dropper, adding a few delicate drops that spread slowly across the basin like waking dreams. Then he takes a small stick of ink pressed long ago from soot and resin and begins to grind it in circles, slow and even, each rotation sounding faintly like sand brushing against stone. There is no rush. The ink will come when it's ready, and he has nowhere else to be. When the pigment is thick and dark enough, he dips the tip of his quill into it, not deeply, just enough to draw a line across the page. He waits a breath, then another, and then, with a hand that trembles slightly but never shakes, he begins to write. The first letter is a curve, deliberate and round. The second, a line that leans slightly to the left. He does not write sentences, not at first. Only symbols, characters, marks that may become something later, but for now are simply shapes. There's peace in that. Sometimes he writes just a single word before resting his hand again on the table, staring softly at the page. Not thinking, just watching. The ink glistens for a moment before beginning to fade into matte stillness. And when it's dry, he begins again. Each letter carries the weight of quiet. The quill does not scratch. It glides. The parchment is thick, handmade, cream-colored, with the faint scent of linen. A single sheet might take him an entire afternoon to fill. Or perhaps it remains only half used, set aside without apology or concern. He writes as one might breathe slowly, instinctively, with pauses not for thought, but for feeling. The candle flickers slightly, as if reading over his shoulder. Wax pools gently at its base, tracing down the wall in lazy rivulets. Outside, the wind brushes against the stone, but inside, nothing moves except the occasional shift of his sleeve or the dip of the quill. He writes about the things no one remembers. About the scent of warm bread on cold mornings. The way a shadow falls across a windowsill at noon. The softness of elder leaves underfoot in autumn. His writing is not meant to be shared. It is simply meant to be written. And when a line is complete, he does not immediately begin the next. He sets the quill aside, rests both hands on the table, and closes his eyes. Sometimes he falls asleep right there, head tilted gently to one side, breath quiet and deep. The ink dries on the page. The candle keeps watch. The room remains exactly the same. Other times, he simply drifts in that in-between space, not fully asleep, not fully awake. A thought may return. A sentence may finish itself, or not. There is no expectation here. Along the shelf above the desk, there are dozens of similar pages, some full, some half-written, some bearing only a few scattered marks. None are titled. None are dated. They are stacked loosely, not filed. There's no order to them. They are not part of a manuscript or a thesis. They are simply moments, recorded gently. Occasionally, another scholar will enter the room. They'll step softly, glance at the sleeping figure, and smile faintly. They won't wake him. They may simply browse the shelf, touch a page or two, then leave again. The ink waits patiently for its next line, even if that line never comes. Some evenings, the scholar writes only one word. Some mornings, not even that. There are days when the candle burns low and no marks are made at all. And yet the ink is always prepared. The parchment is always set out. The room always holds its breath in gentle anticipation. Because here, writing is not a task. It's a resting place. A way of being quiet with one's thoughts. A slow conversation with no listener and no need for reply. As you imagine the ink darkening on parchment, the quill tracing gentle curves across soft, textured paper, perhaps your own thoughts begin to slow too, not stopping, just softening, loosening, unfolding gently, like petals at dusk. There is no conclusion to the writing here, only pauses, only spaces where meaning might someday settle. And so, the scholar sets down his pen once more. The last word glistens faintly in the candlelight. He leans back, exhales softly, and allows his head to tilt just so, finding that familiar place where sleep begins. Outside, the wind passes by again. A leaf scuttles across the stone steps beyond the door. And inside, the ink waits, patiently, for the next moment that needs recording. In the far west corner of the Abbey, tucked behind a thick oak door that doesn't quite close all the way, lies a small, peculiar room. Not many visit it with intention, and yet nearly everyone finds themselves there, eventually. It's a place where the walls are lined not just with books, but with a silence so deep and restful, it feels like sleep itself has settled onto the shelves. This room is called the Manuscript Nest. It is not part of the formal library. The books here aren't arranged by topic or date. Many have no titles on their spines, and some lack covers altogether. They sit in soft stacks and lean into one another as if drowsy. Some are bound in cloth, some in leather, faded to the color of fog, and many show the marks of having been touched often and without haste. The light in this room is dim even at midday. The windows are small and round, placed high on the wall where only the sky can be seen. Their panes are thick and wavy, distorting the clouds into watercolor smudges that drift slowly across the walls. The scent here is different from the rest of the Abbey. Not just parchment and dust, but something faintly sweet like dried violets, or linen stored in cedar. It is a scent that reminds you of things you never experienced, but somehow remember. The kind of scent that makes you slow your breath without realizing it. In the center of the room sits a low table, its edges rounded smooth by time and elbows and the passing of ideas. Around it, a collection of chairs, none matching. Pillowed armchairs with flattened seats, wooden stools with wool blankets folded atop, and even a padded bench where two might sit side by side, or one might curl their legs beneath them and doze. Scholars come here not to study, but to drift. Some bring books from other rooms, books too dense for the bright library upstairs, too poetic for the silent ink room. Others simply arrive, wander the shelves, and let their fingers brush against the soft spines until one calls to them not loudly, but like a memory rising in a dream. The manuscripts in this room are not about wars or kings or debates. They are stories without plot, poems without form, journals with entries written years apart. Many were never meant for others, and yet they were kept, held together with twine, tied in cloth, nestled like fragile thoughts between heavier volumes. No one knows who gathered them here. Perhaps they gathered themselves. One such manuscript sits at the edge of the table, a thin book with frayed corners, its cover embroidered with a small silver star. It contains only 17 pages. Each one holds a dream. Not a dramatic vision, but a soft one. The feeling of sitting in a warm bath as rain taps on the window. The memory of seeing fireflies on a hill you've never visited. The slow realization, while dreaming, that you are dreaming, and the comfort that brings. There's a chair beside this manuscript where a young scholar often sits, though never for long. She arrives most afternoons, selects one of these strange, untethered volumes, and begins to read. Not quickly. Never quickly. Her eyes drift across the lines as her body begins to soften into the cushion beneath her. Before long, her chin rests against her collar. Her hands fold into her lap, and the book slips gently from her fingers onto the floor, still open to a page that doesn't mind waiting. Sometimes she dreams of the stories she reads. Sometimes the stories enter her dreams without her knowing. And sometimes she wakes only to write something new in the margins, a single word, or a drawn spiral, or a note about the sound the wind made as she was drifting off. Then she leaves the book where it is, for the next reader to find. Along the back wall stands a small cabinet with narrow drawers. Inside are fragments, pages without books, phrases written in beautiful script across torn paper, bookmarks with pressed herbs, and a few soft ink marks. These, too, are dreams. Leftovers from thoughts that didn't need conclusions. Whispers caught before they disappeared. There is a manuscript titled Hours Between Bells, handwritten in a soft slanting style, with entire pages devoted to descriptions of shadows. How they moved along a hallway, how they curled around the edge of a sleeping scholar's shoe, how they deepened beneath a teacup as the afternoon light faded. Another contains only lists of things remembered from dreams. A staircase that floated, a door made of light, a room with no corners, only cushions. The pages are not meant to be deciphered. They are meant to be felt. Every so often, someone falls asleep in the manuscript nest for longer than expected. The candles here always few, and their wax drips soundlessly onto shallow clay plates. Light fades naturally, and no one comes to wake you. Blankets appear without being requested. Someone, long before, ensured that comfort would always be part of this room's nature. And in this stillness, the manuscripts wait not for recognition or praise, but simply to be near those who need rest. As if each book, each loose page, is itself a sleeper, content to lie undisturbed, full of half-thoughts and gentle visions. If you listen closely, you may hear the soft shuffle of parchment as someone turns a page. Or perhaps it's just the wind nudging a curtain. Or perhaps it's nothing at all. Here, imagination and memory blend until they are indistinguishable, until thought itself feels like dreaming. There is no tension in this room, no questions to be answered, no right or wrong way to sit, to breathe, to read, or not read. The only rhythm here is that of candles flickering and sighs escaping in half-sleep. And as you picture this room in your mind, its quiet shelves and clouded windows, its gentle chairs and slumbering readers, perhaps your own breath has slowed. Perhaps your thoughts have softened at the edges. Perhaps, without even noticing, you've begun to drift, like one of those pages tucked into a forgotten manuscript. Floating, waiting, resting, there is no need to turn the page just yet. When the sun climbs gently to its highest point, and the shadows grow soft and round beneath the arches, the cloister becomes the quiet heart of the Abbey, a place not for thought or study, but simply for being. Encircled by stone walkways and carved columns, the cloister garden rests in the center of the Abbey's oldest square. Its stones are uneven and warmed by centuries of soft footsteps, the edges worn smooth by sandals and silence. At midday, the space fills not with sound, but with a golden kind of stillness, bright, but never harsh, like light filtered through warm linen or cream-colored drapes, moving slightly in a breeze. The sun slips in through the open archways and dapples the grass below in dancing patterns. Each breeze stirs the rosemary bushes that grow thick near the garden's edge. Their scent rises gently, mingling with lavender, mint, and the faint sweetness of flowering sage. Everything here seems to exhale. You begin to notice the quiet in a different way, not as the absence of noise, but as a presence of calm. In the center, a small stone fountain trickles without urgency. Its basin is lined with moss, and the water that bubbles up from its middle doesn't rise high just enough to catch the light and fall again in small silver strands. Birds sometimes stop here for sips between naps in the roof beams above. Their wings flutter briefly, then vanish into stillness, as if even they feel the hush of this hour. Flat stone benches line the inside edges of the cloister walkways. Few are shaded, tucked beneath arches where vines curl up the columns. Others are warmed directly by the sun, inviting scholars to sit, to stretch, or simply to lean back and let their eyes drift closed. These are benches built not for conversation or work, but for pausing, for sighing, for noticing the scent of time that lingers in the air long after the wind has passed. One bench, in particular, rests near a patch of wild thyme, its tiny purple blossoms trembling in the breeze. Here, an old scholar often sits, wrapped in a woolen shawl, hands resting lightly on his knees. He does not bring books or paper. He does not take notes. He only listens to the fountain, the rustling herbs, the gentle hush of wings overhead. Occasionally, he hums softly, not a song, but something between breath and memory, that not far from him. Another scholar walks slowly along the cloister path. She carries a sprig of lemon balm, freshly picked, and she runs it along her fingertips as she walks. Her steps fall into the rhythm of the space. She circles once, then twice, and then stops, tilting her head back to feel the sun press gently against her closed eyelids. Her breath becomes deeper, slower, and she lets go of the need to think. The air is warm, but not heavy. The light seems to wrap around everything like a comforter. It softens the stone, gives the grass a golden hue, and turns the old leaded windows above into mirrors of the sky. Even the shadows seem slow, stretching languidly across the walkways like they, too, are resting. No sharp lines, no harsh edges. Just the slow movement of time made visible through light and leaf. Beneath one arch, a young scholar reclines with his back against a column, a journal open in his lap. His pen rests idly between his fingers. He's written only a single line: "Midday lies down beside me." That is all. The ink is still wet. He watches it dry, then closes the book without another word. Not everything needs elaboration. Not every moment asks to be remembered with detail. Some simply ask to be lived slowly, the wind that moves through. The cloister comes in soft gusts carrying hints of pine and distant rain, though no clouds gather yet. The breeze lifts the hems of robes and makes the tall grass along the garden edge ripple like water. A few petals drift from the rosemary bush, landing silently on the stone dot in the north corner. Beneath a twisting vine of clematis stands a small table and a teapot left by someone earlier in the morning. The pot is still warm to the touch, the scent of steeped mint and sage rising faintly from beneath the lid. 2 cups rest beside it, one half full, forgotten in favor of the sun. No one rushes to clean it. It will be cared for eventually, when the shadows shift, when the light moves. On, when waking becomes the right thing to do again, the cloister doesn't measure time. It marks it instead in warmth, in scent, in the angle of sunbeams across old stone. A midday moment can stretch endlessly here, unfurling like ivy across the wall. And when it does pass, it does so gently, without ever seeming to leave. What lingers isn't the passing of hours, but the feeling of having paused in them, without resistance. Even the bees seem to know this pace. They drift from flower to flower with unhurried purpose, their small hums rising and fading into the rhythm of the fountain. A few settle into the sun-warmed corners of stone benches, pausing as if to rest. You might lie on your back in the grass here, arms folded beneath your head, and stare up through the open square of sky framed by cloister arches. The blue would seem deeper than usual, the clouds more languid. The sunlight would blink between your lashes until your eyes closed fully, and you sank into that special kind of midday rest that is not quite sleep, but not waking either, that no one would disturb. There are no schedules in the cloister, only the steady cycle of shadow and sun, of breeze and bird call. Here, life is allowed to pause. The world beyond these stone walls continues. Somewhere, bells ring, pages turn, footsteps echo. But here, in the cloister, the only sound is that of breath. the quiet rise and fall of presence, the silent agreement between nature and stone, to remain, to slow, to soften. And so you do. You sit a while longer on the cool stone bench, or perhaps you stretch out in the grass beneath the rosemary. The warmth of the sun seeps into your skin, loosening the last edges of thought. The breeze brushes past your face, cool and fragrant. A bird sings once, and goes quiet again. The fountain continues its steady trickle, unchanged. Rain never arrives loudly at the Abbey. It begins like a soft suggestion, an unseen hush settling onto the garden walls, a damp coolness drawing close through the windows, and then, ever so gently, the first taps of water meeting stone. It's a gray afternoon, the kind of day when light feels like wool-thick, muted, wrapped loosely around the shoulders of the building. The clouds do not rush overhead. They settle in place, resting like tired thoughts above the peaks of the roof. The entire Abbey seems to draw inward, as if responding to the weather's invitation to pause. Up on the slate roof, the rain begins with soft percussion. It doesn't pour, it plays. 100 tiny rhythms made not to awaken, but to comfort. The droplets land like faint fingertips, tapping against old tiles and leaded glass. The Abbey listens without reaction. It has heard this song many times before. Inside, near the center of the second floor, the scholars pause whatever quiet task they had begun. A few glance up toward the ceiling. A few close their books, not because they're finished, but because the rain has offered something better. A better silence. A more ancient focus. The windows mist softly. On their glass, rivulets begin to form, thin at first, then joined by others. They move slowly, like streams remembered in dreams. The view of the gardens blurs. The cloisters. Arches lose their sharpness. The world becomes watercolor. In a room with arched ceilings and worn floorboards, a scholar stands at a tall window. His breath fogs the pane as he watches the rain bead and slide. A cup of tea in his hands, still warm, balances the coolness of the weather. He doesn't sip just yet. He simply holds it, feels the gentle heat rising in curls, blending with the scent of petrichor, the earthy perfume of rain upon old stone. Outside, the rain speaks in layers. On the roof, it is rhythmic and even. On the flagstones, it is softer, a liquid whisper. On the herb garden, it creates a shimmer across the rosemary, and time, making the green glisten more deeply than before. Every plant leans slightly, not in protest, but in welcome. Rain, after all, is no stranger here. The Abbey corridors grow dimmer as the clouds settle into their fullness. Candles are lit with no urgency. Their flames flicker gently against the gray walls, joining the rain in soft companionship. Shadows dance in corners, and reflections ripple gently across the surfaces of polished wood. A scholar in the library, seated in a chair far from the window, pauses mid-sentence in her book. She listens. Nothing moves but her fingers on the page, and even they stop for a moment. She closes the book slowly, rests her hands in her lap, and leans her head back. The sound of rain has crept into her mind and filled the space between thoughts. Her breathing slows. Her shoulders soften. She does not try to follow the rhythm of the rain. She allows it to follow her. Elsewhere in the Abbey, a parchment lies half inscribed, with a line of ink left behind by a scholar who meant to return, but now sleeps curled gently in a velvet chair. The windowsill behind him trembles slightly with each gust of rain. A candle beside him leans in the draught, and the shadows it casts stretch long across the floor. The rain begins to grow steadier. Now, never harsh, only fuller. It deepens, like a melody adding low notes, wrapping around the Abbey's rooftops and echoing softly in stone corridors. On the attic floor, drops patter against the slate with comforting predictability. The sound could be mistaken for someone softly turning pages in another room. in one tucked-away corner of the Abbey. A tiny windowless chamber is warmed by a thick woolen rug and a stone fireplace that glows with slow-burning coals. A scholar lies on a cot here, not unwell, just weary in the most welcome way. The fire breathes quietly, and even without windows, the sound of rain seems to find its way into the room, humming gently through the walls. He lies with his eyes open, watching the ceiling, though he sees nothing in particular. The soft beating of rain feels like a lullaby written without notes. He blinks slowly. His fingers curl loosely around the edge of a woolen blanket. Somewhere nearby, a bell chimes not for prayer or gathering, but simply to mark the hour. A single rounded tone, like a pebble dropped in still water. The Abbey receives the rain like a gift, not for cleansing, not for change, but for slowing, for stopping altogether, for returning to something older than thought. The stone walls seem to remember rains from centuries before, similar drops landing on similar roofs, creating similar silences. The memory of rain lives deep in the building's bones. Even the manuscripts seem to respond. Pages ruffle ever so slightly in drafty rooms. Ink dries slower. Margins gather the quiet echo of falling water. Notes are left unfinished, not lost, just lovingly abandoned in favor of the present moment. Out in the great hallway near the western wing, a wide ledge under the arched windows has become a kind of resting place. Cushions and wool throws wait there, never quite put away, always ready. Two scholars rest there now, neither speaking, each lost in a half-sleep, with the rain as their cover. Their posture is relaxed, limbs soft, faces turned toward the sound. The drops above them create a muffled rhythm that draws the body downward, toward stillness. Outside, the world remains veiled. The garden is now a mosaic of wet stone and trembling petals. The cloister path glistens. Pools form in low corners and reflect the dark gray sky in gentle ripples. Nothing stirs but the rain dot, and above it all, the Abbey's great roof continues to receive every drop without complaint. It does not groan or echo. It absorbs. It listens. It gives the rain a place to land out eventually, as the afternoon wanes and the rain continues its soft descent. The entire Abbey drifts into a kind of shared hush. Thoughts grow quieter, movements slow. Tea cools in cups. Ink waits on the edge of drying. As the rain faded and the Abbey exhaled its long, slow breath, the light outside grew tender again, filtered through soft clouds. It turned golden and long, stretching across the stone floor like threads of quiet warmth. This was the time of day when sound curled up in corners and shadows tiptoed across rooms, and nothing seemed urgent or unfinished. Out in the west wing of the Abbey, tucked behind a wooden arch and beneath rafters wrapped in ancient ivy, sat the scriptorium, a chamber made not just for study, but for the kind of rest that arises from being gently surrounded by quiet things. The air here moved in loops, caught between sunbeams and memory. It was always a little warmer in this room, always a little more golden. Scrolls lived here. They didn't crowd the room, but filled it like low, steady breathing. Rolled neatly in niches carved into stone, they rested under linen wraps and ribbons, beside pieces of driftwood or river stone keepsakes from long walks, now perfectly still. These were not the kind of scrolls scholars raced to study. These were the scrolls one returned to slowly, like dreams revisited through a window still, misted from sleep. The walls were lined in shelves that sloped gently toward the center of the room, as though even the wood understood the pull of gravity. At this hour, dust sat softly in the corners, undisturbed, glowing faintly in the honey-colored light. A tall window overlooked the cloister garden. The glass was old, slightly rippled, so the world outside looked more like a watercolor painting than a scene. Sunlight entered in soft stripes, drawing lines across the scroll racks and warming the flagstones in shapes that shifted as the hours passed. Dust floated in those light beams, spinning gently, not rushing, not falling, just suspended. In one corner, at a wide wooden table worn smooth with time, an older scholar sat with his hands resting on a half-open scroll. His fingers didn't move. His eyes were not focused on the writing. He was simply with it, as if the words were breathing, and he didn't want to interrupt. The scroll was a pale cream, edged with faint brown and inked with characters that looked hand-stitched rather than written. He'd read them before, and would again, but today, reading was not the point. Near him, another scholar was choosing a scroll from the shelf. Her fingers hovered over the spines not to pick the right one, but the one that called softly. Eventually, she chose a scroll tied with green thread. She smiled faintly, not from recognition, but from the weight of the linen wrap. It reminded her of spring walks and mint leaves dried between pages. She didn't unroll it right away. She just sat, held it in her lap, and felt the hush settle around her like a warm shawl. This hour was not made for discovery. It was made for drifting. Some scrolls were left open, mid-sentence, beside cups of herbal tea now cool. Others had tiny pressed flowers tucked between their folds, or slips of parchment containing notes that had no clear purpose, only a phrase or an image, or a question someone had thought once and never finished writing down. There was a scroll filled with descriptions of shadows, how they curved beneath arches, or how they looked just before the rain returned. Another was devoted entirely to birdsong, how the tones changed between morning and evening, how the echo of a thrush seemed to fall just a breath behind the breeze. One scroll contained nothing but lists of things that were soft: moss, candle wax, fresh wool, moonlight on skin, silence near books. Most scrolls were unfinished, but not because they were abandoned. They were complete in their incompleteness. No scholar here tried to finish anything. That was not the point. Words, like rain and dreams, often didn't end where one expected. Near the windows, a young scholar lay curled up on the floor, a velvet cushion beneath her elbow. A scroll was open on the rug before her, and one of her fingers still touched the edge, though she had drifted off mid-sentence. Her face was turned toward the glass, and golden light slid across her cheek like a whisper. She was not hurried, even in sleep. The room seemed to bend around her rest, as if it had expected this. One shelf, slightly bowed from age, held scrolls tied in ribbon the color of faded ink. These scrolls were filled not with facts or formulas, but with wandering observations. How candlelight reflects off the spines of books, or how silence can collect like rainwater in the hollows of stone steps. One scroll simply contained the scent of pressed lavender petals, still faintly fragrant after all this time. The windows let in the soft sounds of a garden settling after rain, the distant patter of water still dripping from leaves, the low hum of bees returning to late blossoms, the occasional rustle of wind through ivy. Nothing called attention to itself. Every sound folded into the next like fabric layered on fabric. Even the shadows here moved slowly. As the sun lowered, they lengthened across the scroll racks and drew new patterns on the floor. The beams above creaked gently, and with each moment the room softened, like dough left to rise in warmth and silence. You might imagine yourself there now, sitting cross-legged on the rug, fingers dusted with old parchment. Around you, the air is thick with stillness, not heavy, but soft. You feel your breath sink with the quiet. Nothing in this room needs to be done. Everything can wait. And so, you read a line or don't. You trace the edge of a shadow with your gaze, and then let your thoughts follow it out the window, down to the wet cobbles of the cloister, where more light gathers than ever seems to leave. Time does not tick here. It rests, it hovers, it soothes. As the sun continues its descent, and the shadows drift farther across the scrolls. No one speaks. Not from restraint, but because the quiet is too complete to interrupt. A single page rustles as it rolls slightly, then stills again. That sound alone is enough. Eventually, candles will be lit, scrolls will be rewrapped, cushions will be fluffed for tomorrow's dreams. But for now, nothing changes. There is a moment in the Abbey, each day, when all things seem to fall into perfect stillness. It happens not because someone commands it, or because a task is done, but because of something much smaller, the sound of a single bell, and the long pause that follows. The bell itself is not large. It does not hang in the high tower, nor swing above the chapel. It rests quietly in a small alcove beside the cloister, suspended from a curved beam of oak. Time has softened its color to a dark bronze gray, and vines have crept gently around. The bass, it is not rung often, and when it is, it only sounds once. No one speaks of it. No rule surrounds it. And yet, when the bell rings just once, something changes in the rhythm of the Abbey. Today, the hour drifts into golden softness, and the bell chimes with the lightest breath of sound. A single note, low and round and lingering. It does not echo far. It does not disturb. It hums, then fades, and nothing rushes in to replace it. The sound wraps itself around the rafters, curls down the corridors, and drapes gently across the stone steps. Those who hear it do not react with surprise. They simply pause. A hand is lowered. A scroll is set down. A gaze turns toward the light filtering through the windows. Breaths deepen, shoulders lower, and the pace of thought slows to match. The stillness of the bell's retreating voice. In the herb garden, a scholar tending mint lifts her head slightly, then rests her wrists on the rim of the pot. The breeze continues, carrying the soft scent of earth and rosemary. She lets her hands fall into her lap and gazes at the sky. She does not move again for some time. Inside the Abbey, by the long table near the scriptoria shelves, another scholar has just finished blotting a letter. The ink is still wet, shimmering slightly in the sun. He leans back in his chair. The bell has told him what the paper cannot, that the time for movement has passed. Now is the hour of stillness. Throughout the Abbey, these gentle halts unfold. Like petals opening in reverse, a cup is set down mid-sip. A curtain, half pulled, is left to sway in the breeze. A door is only half closed. In the hallway outside the sleeping quarters, someone removes their sandals, not out of necessity, but simply because bare feet make less sound. It is not a call to prayer, nor a summons. It is a suggestion, a breath, a reminder that there is something sacred in doing nothing at all, in resting for no reason, in letting time continue without us. The cloister is bathed in late light now, the sort that softens sharp edges and turns the stone warm to the touch. Birds shuffle in the trees above. The arches, their songs growing slower, more spaced apart. The fountain in the center trickles steadily, as it always has, but even that seems quieter after the bell. The bell's note, though long gone, still echoes gently in memory. It lingers like the scent of old pages, or the aftertaste of honey on the tongue. You can almost feel it still vibrating in the floor beneath your feet, like the last breath of a lullaby. One monk sits beneath an archway, with his knees drawn up, chin resting on folded hands. His eyes are closed, not in sleep, not quite, but in some soft in-between place. He remembers the bell, but he doesn't need to hold on to the sound. The silence that followed is enough. Even the candles seem to understand. Their flames remain. Steady, their wax pooling slowly in half-forgotten holders, shaped like leaves and shells. Shadows remain where they are. Time itself feels folded into a quiet envelope sealed not with wax, but with a nod from the universe that this moment need not go anywhere. In one corner of the Abbey, where stone steps lead down to the old archives. A scholar has paused mid-step. He's holding a cloth-wrapped bundle of papers, and his eyes rest on the space between stairs, as though reading something written in the air itself. Slowly, he sits down, bundle on his lap, and rests his back against the wall. His body is still. His thoughts quieter still. Even in the kitchen, where preparations usually bubble and clink, the pots are still. A kettle half filled remains cool on the stone. Bread rests in a bowl, rising under a cloth that no one lifts just yet. The scent of lavender and lemon balm floats lightly in from a nearby basket of herbs left untouched. This quiet does not ask anything of anyone. It does not instruct or urge or scold. It only offers. And those who accept it by sitting or pausing or sighing or sleeping find themselves steeped in something gentle and invisible. There is no ceremony, no spoken rule. No one records this moment in a ledger, and no one is asked to remember. The time, it cannot be marked. It can only be felt. Perhaps in another time, someone did write of the bell. Perhaps a scroll exists somewhere that explains when it began and why it only rings once. But no one here seeks that scroll. If it exists, it is not consulted. If it was lost, no one is looking. Because here, in this hour of velvet shadows and honey light, the bell is not a mystery. It is simply part of the Abbey's breath. And when it rings, the Abbey breathes out. Outside the walls, the wind moves more freely, but even it seems to tread softly now. Leaves barely stir, grass bends slightly, then returns to stillness. A bee hovers above a bloom and lingers there, motionless, before finally dipping down as though deciding not to rush the moment. And somewhere beyond the cloister, a child, perhaps the gardener's youngest, has curled up in the grass with it scroll as a pillow. She does not know why the bell rang, but she is asleep, and that is reason enough. When the hour passes, and it always does, no one marks its end. The stillness is not broken. It simply folds back into the rhythm of soft footsteps and the creak of pages. Scrolls are gathered again. Evening falls gently over the Abbey, not with fanfare or sudden dusk, but with a kind of feathered grace like a quilt being drawn slowly over the landscape. The golden light begins to dim, melting into deeper hues of honey and gray. The stones, warmed from the sun's long embrace, now give off a sleepy kind of heat, like the afterglow of a story whispered under blankets inside. The scholars do not move quickly. Their pace has softened with the light, every step a hush. It is the time of day when books are no longer for reading, but for holding, and chairs are no longer seats, but resting places for the body to soften into. The Abbey prepares itself, not for slumber entirely, but for the long, delicious pause before it. Some have returned to their cells, small rooms with stone walls, thick wooden doors, and simple beds carved low and close to the ground. Each bed is topped with thick woolen blankets, a kind that smell faintly of the sun, and pillows filled with goose feathers that have been fluffed and reshaped each evening since. Well, no one remembers when. A rhythm, long and unbroken dot in one of these rooms. A scholar sits on the edge of his bed with a book open across his lap. The pages are only half glanced at. His gaze wanders now, not through the lines of text, but to the soft flicker of a candle on the wall, the glow playing gently over stone. He reaches for his blanket and pulls it close, not yet to sleep, but to settle in. The fabric is thick and weighty, a kind of warmth that asks nothing in return. In the shared sleeping quarters that some prefer, the beds line the walls in quiet rows. Each has its own shelf built in just enough space for a small candle, a folded cloth, and perhaps a single treasured item. One has a carved wooden rabbit, another a smooth river stone wrapped in linen. These little comforts do not speak, but they keep presence. Books are everywhere here, not in organized shelves or tightly packed rows, but scattered like memories. One lies open on a pillow, its pages rippling ever so slightly in the evening air. Another rests on the floor, near a low chair, where someone had sat, read, yawned, and eventually chosen the floor over formality. A third, smaller than a handspan, rests on a quilt as though tucked in for the night itself. A breeze moves gently through the corridor outside, brushing through linen curtains and carrying with it the faintest scent of lavender and old parchment. The wind here is careful. It knows where it is and travels softly, slipping through gaps in stone and never disturbing the slumber it passes. One scholar has wrapped herself in a shawl near the hearth and now leans into the arm of a wide cushioned chair. She has no intention of making it to her bed. The book she had been holding rests closed beneath her hand, but she hasn't noticed it's been closed for some time. Her eyes are half shut, not from tiredness, but from peace. Around her, the soft rustle of feathers, blankets, and breathing begins to echo, gently and quietly, through the space. The Abbey breathes with them. Inhale flicker of candlelight. Exhale pages resting still. Inhale blankets adjusted. Exhale heads lowered to pillows. The act of sleep is not seen as a departure here, nor an interruption. It is a continuation of thought, simply without the need for words. Even the books seem to understand this. Their pages, often left open or marked with a ribbon, do not mind being paused. The ink does not dry with impatience. The stories wait, and the ideas nest gently, knowing their time will come again tomorrow, or the next day, or never at all. In one corner of the Abbey's library annex, a long feather mattress has been tucked beside a shelf. No one knows who first brought it there, or why, but it remains. A haven for those who wander and find themselves suddenly too still to return to their rooms. The mattress is low and wide, and scattered across it are small cushions stitched with faded thread and worn into the shape of heads long gone. Tonight, someone lies there, now a scholar, who had meant to organize scrolls, or perhaps to journal. A dream. But the moment he sat, the softness beneath him invited more than just pause. Now he is curled gently to one side, his head resting on a pillow that smells faintly of cedar, and one arm draped lazily across a small volume of poetry. The words inside do not mind the pressure. In fact, they sleep too. Feathers shift. Blankets rise and fall. There is no sound louder than a yawn or a sigh. The quiet, which in other places might seem like absence, here is full and round like the low hum of a lullaby with no beginning or end. Candles burn slowly, their wax pooling like puddles in shallow dishes. One flame leans slightly in the wind and then returns to stillness. Another dances once, then quiets. Each flicker marks time in the way tree rings do not by what is lost, but by what is held, layered gently over what came before. Some scholars fall asleep sitting up, their heads resting against the backs of chairs, spines curved like commas. Others lie down fully, wrapped in wool and the whisper of dreams. There is no bedtime here, only the slow surrender to quiet. And in this surrender, the Abbey seems to smile. If you walked its halls now, your steps would be met not with silence, but with softness. Footfalls on feathered rugs, the gentle creak of floorboards that do not mind being stepped on, the slow exhale of someone settling deeper into their slumber. Books, feathers, blankets, stone, wax, sleep, all of it held gently beneath the low arches of the ceiling, wrapped in a stillness that does not demand sleep, but welcomes it, invites it, offers it like tea in a warm mug. And if you stood in the doorway now, unsure whether to stay or go, you would find that the room has already made its decision for you. A cushion has been left empty, a blanket half folded, a candle not yet lit, waiting for your presence to make it whole. Not far from the cloister's east wing, Beyond a narrow passage lined with rosemary and stone, there is a door that almost no one notices. It is plain, rounded at the top, and always left slightly ajar, as though it were unsure whether it wanted to be open or closed. Behind it is a small room with no particular name, though some have quietly come to call it the dream room. It is here that a quiet monk spends most of his time, if time is the right word for something that passes without being measured. No bell rings for him. No schedule governs his movements. He arrives when he feels the world begin to blur, when the line between waking and sleeping thins like morning mist, and he leaves only when the candles have burned down to their stubs, and the last sigh of thought has drifted through the window. He does not read or write in the usual sense. His parchment is soft and aged, often reused. His ink smells faintly of chamomile and ash. His pen is made from a quill that fell naturally into his lap one evening long ago, and he never replaced it. The monk's task or calling, though he would never use such a grand word, is to record dreams. Not his own. He listens. Or rather, he watches. Over the years, scholars who have spent nights in the Abbey's more restful corners have sometimes awoken with a single phrase on their lips, or the lingering sense of a place that doesn't exist. Sometimes they leave these fragments on slips of paper at the door. Sometimes they say nothing, but the monk somehow knows. He does not disturb sleepers. He does not ask questions. But if someone has dreamed something delicate, something that clings to the folds of their robe or hovers above their tea, he will write. Slowly, carefully, not trying to capture it, only trace its shape. Tonight, a single candle burns in his chamber, the flame steady and low. The scent of lavender clings to the air, mixing with the faint sweetness of old paper and beeswax. A small window high on the wall reveals a sliver of moonlight, enough to draw silver lines across the floor. He sits cross-legged on a cushion, so worn it barely holds its shape. A bundle of soft pages lies before him, tied with a fraying blue ribbon. He unties it with fingers that move like petals brushing one another, and lays the pages out like shells on a shore. One reads, "A staircase made of light, leading nowhere." Another, "I saw a book where the ink kept rearranging itself." And one more, left unsigned. There was a bell, but it rang underwater. He does not interpret. He does not correct. He simply adds, with small looping letters, whatever detail remains. In the air around him, perhaps a color that lingers, perhaps the mood of the room, perhaps only the way the breeze moved just before someone awoke. When he grows tired, he lets his quill rest in the groove carved into the desk. Sometimes the ink bottle remains open, untouched, and yet the scent of it fills the room for hours. After, some say his writing continues even after he has fallen asleep, lines appearing faintly on parchment without his touch. But no one speaks of this out loud. His dreams, when he has them, are not written down. On one particular night perhaps a slip of parchment has been left at his door. It is wrapped around a sprig of thyme and tied with a thread the color of moonstone. The writing is soft, slanted, as if penned mid-dream. There was a tower made of pillows, and I climbed it until the stars melted. He reads it once, then sets it beside the others. He doesn't write anything further. That dream is already full. Sometimes the monk simply listens, not to people, but to the silence between rooms, the whisper of wind brushing past stone, the hush of turned pages in rooms far away. These are dreams too, in their own way, echoes of resting minds. He stores them not on paper, but in a corner of his room where a bundle of wool and twine sits like a nest. The walls of the room hold no decoration, only shelves filled with ribbon-tied collections of dreams. They are never alphabetized, never sorted by theme or date. They rest in the order in which they arrived, some slipped in during thunderstorms, Others left folded inside books by accident. Still others imagined by those who never fully awoke. There is one dream he returns to often. It is written on thick parchment, soft at the edges. The words are faint, as though someone had whispered them while asleep. A library where each book was a person's breath. He runs his fingers over this dream whenever he begins to forget why he writes. Not for fame, not for order, but because these dreams deserve to rest somewhere, to be held, to be remembered even if no one reads them again. On this night, the monk finds himself nodding, not quite asleep, but close. He places one hand gently over the newest page, not to protect it, but to bless it with silence. His breath deepens. The candle leans ever so slightly. The room around him waits outside. The Abbey has hushed again. A breeze rolls through the courtyard, slow and thoughtful. Somewhere, a scholar has fallen asleep at her desk, cheek resting on an open page. In another room, a pillow has shifted beneath someone's turning head. A page flutters once, then falls still. The monk dreams now too, though no one will write it down. And that's all right. Some dreams are meant to rise like mist, to drift. Between candles and cloisters, to find no form, but to warm the air they pass through. In his room, the candle finally gutters. A soft thread of smoke rises, hurling toward the rafters. The room smells like endings and beginnings, like memories that never needed to be made. The dreams have been tended, the silence recorded. The monk breathes slowly, and somewhere in the quiet, the stars rearrange themselves above the Abbey, blinking like ink drops across the parchment sky. By the time the final glow of twilight slipped beneath the hills, the Abbey had grown quieter than before. Not silent, never silent, but softened, like breath through a woolen shawl. What remained was not the absence of sound, but its transformation. Daylight's gentle hum had become a kind of nighttime hush, shaped by stone, candlelight, and dreams just beginning to form. Along the highest corridor of the Abbey, up a narrow stair that few ever used, there sat a window. It was not grand or wide. It didn't face the sunrise or the moon directly. It simply opened onto the sky in the quietest way. The glass panes were old and imperfect, their surfaces softly warped like ripples frozen in place. Framed by dark wood and wrapped in ivy, the window looked less like part of a building and more like something the stars had carved for themselves. No one claimed the space around it. It had no name on any Abbey ledger. But most of the scholars had passed it at some point, and many returned never on schedule and never in groups. They arrived one by one, always in the stillest hours, often not entirely awake, as though guided there by dreams that continued even as their eyes opened. Tonight, the sky was clear, not just above the window, but across the full stretch of heaven. The stars had come early, eager, scattering themselves like dust across velvet. Some twinkled with the softness of candlelight, others held firm like glints of silver pressed into midnight fabric. There was no moon, yet only stars, and the deep, echoing dark between them. A scholar sat by the window now. His robe was loosely tied, and his slippers made no sound as he shifted. He did not speak. There would be no one to answer him, even if he did. But his breath moved with a quiet rhythm, slower now, like someone listening rather than thinking. Stone bench below the window was worn smooth from time, padded with a folded wool blanket that had never been removed. A small journal rested on the sill, its pages untouched, its cover soft from many hands. No pen lay beside it. That was not the purpose of the journal. It was for holding, not writing. Sometimes it absorbed wishes. Sometimes it held tears. Mostly it remained closed content to simply be near starlight. The window offered no sweeping view, only a narrow glimpse of sky. But in that space, everything seemed to unfold, Constellations wandered in and out of frame. One star blinked more slowly than the rest, like it was thinking. A small meteor streaked quietly by, unannounced, unseen by all but the scholar below. He did not react. He only breathed. The air was cool now, touched by stone and leaf. Somewhere in the garden, crickets had begun their slow, uneven chorus. Sound carried faintly through the window, just enough to remind the watcher that the earth, too, was still awake. The scholar leaned his head against the wood. His eyes were half-lidded, his body neither tense nor slumped. He had not come to see something in particular, only to be with it, to be near the stars, to rest beside them, to let their stillness seep in. On the wall beside him, someone had once scratched a tiny mark, a star, drawn in just a few soft lines. It was barely visible, but its presence gave the space a secret kind of memory. Someone long ago had felt something here. That feeling remained, held in the cool stone. Hours did not pass here in the usual way. Time unspooled more slowly in this corridor. The stars overhead remained unchanged, unmoving. To the eye, only the warmth of the scholar's breath on the glass revealed that moments were still slipping past. Elsewhere in the Abbey, other scholars had begun to drift into deeper sleep. The tea rooms were empty now, save for the last candle flickering. In the corner, books lay face down near pillows. Blankets had been pulled high. Feathers had settled. Even the ink in the scriptorium had stilled, as if taking its own rest. But here, near the window, the world remained open. A second scholar entered the corridor, her feet bare, her robe trailing behind her like a soft tide. She said nothing. Her presence did not disturb the one already seated. She only stepped near, rested her hand on the windowsill, and stood for a while in the hush. They did not acknowledge one another. But neither was alone. This was not a place for conversation or exchange. It was a place for stillness, for watching the sky and remembering nothing, for letting go without knowing what is being released, for breathing with the stars rather than beneath them. Eventually, the woman sat as well, folding her legs beneath her on the bench. She did not bring a book or candle. Her hands rested in her lap, her eyes fixed not on any one star, but on the shape of the dark between them. The wind brushed past once more, slipping through the ivy and into the hall. It carried the scent of something earthy like moss, warmed by old stone. The breeze did not linger. It knew its place. For those awake in that moment, the Abbey had never felt more alive, not in the busy way of waking hours, but in the deep, almost breathless presence of everything resting. The walls were holding stories. The floor, warmed by sun now gone, hummed gently. The ceiling above, with its quiet wooden beams, stretched out like a spine cradling thought. Outside, the stars continued to blink softly, without purpose, not calling attention to themselves, only offering light. Eventually, the two scholars, still without words, let their heads lean against the wall behind them. One closed her eyes. The other kept his open just long enough to see a final streak of light dart across the corner of the sky. A shooting star, they might have called it, had they been speaking. But here, in the window's glow, it was simply a breath, one small exhale from the night itself. They did not need to wish upon it. They had already arrived where wishes go to rest. There is something quietly beautiful about things left unfinished, not forgotten or ignored, just gently paused. In the Abbey, incompletion is not a flaw. It is a soft echo of the day's rhythm, a kind of hush that hangs in the air like dust. Suspended in a beam of candlelight, a book left open, a candle still burning, though its reader has drifted away. These are not mistakes. They are the way things end here, without endings at all. In the Abbey's reading room, the last flickers of evening rest over pages that will not be turned tonight. One manuscript lies open beside a quill that has slipped slightly sideways, as if the writer's hand had simply grown tired and floated away. The ink has dried in a crescent shape, unfinished at the edge of a thought. No one will return to complete the sentence. No one needs to. Not far from the scriptorium, a tall candle leans slightly to one side. Its wax has melted over the edge of its brass holder, dripping in gentle curls down the base. The flame dances once, then settles again. It has burned patiently for hours and seems content to burn just a little longer. The wax pool beneath it is warm, soft-edged, glowing faintly like memory. Books lie scattered in quiet corners, pages spread open like wings mid-rest. Some are propped on wooden stands, others forgotten on cushions, left as if the reader simply stood up and walked away without deciding to. No one tidies them. No one dares. A book left open in this place is a sacred thing still dreaming its way through the night. One small volume rests on a windowsill, its cover tilted open just enough to let the wind brush across its pages. A dried sprig of rosemary marks the place where reading paused. The scent has softened over time, but it still lingers like the warmth from a candle long since blown out. A bookmark, not of ribbon or leather, but of something more living, more patient. Outside the cloister, along a stone bench warmed faintly from the afternoon sun, another book rests in stillness. It has no title on its spine, just a soft cloth cover and a velvet string slipped between two chapters. No one is around to read it. It doesn't mind. Books here do not mind being unread. They breathe slowly, page by page, without anyone watching. Candles do the same. Some have burned halfway, wax cooling into smooth domes. Others are only just beginning their evening glow. And many stand still and silent, waiting to be remembered. Not one of them flickers in impatience. Not one hurries toward the end. In the garden hallway, a scholar had once left a book on the step beside the fountain. Rain had come later that night, but the book had not been harmed. It had absorbed the mist like a gentle bath, its pages now softly curled at the edges. It sits there still, a little heavier, a little wiser for having weathered the night. There is a chair near the library hearth, where someone once fell asleep while reading. A blanket is still draped over the arm, and a book lies open across the cushion. No one moves it. The candle beside it burns low now, its flame stretching long shadows against the floor. The story inside remains unfinished, but somehow complete. In one of the upper alcoves, a parchment note rests on a stone shelf. Just one word is written there. Perhaps that is all. No signature, no explanation. A sentence never begun. A thought never chased. Yet the word remains as soft and weightless as a feather. It feels at home here, among all the other things that never needed more. Elsewhere, tucked behind the altar, an old scroll lies unrolled halfway across a wooden bench. Dust gathers lightly on the ink. The words are not hidden. They are simply resting, waiting for nothing. Some say the scroll was once part of a great treatise. Others believe it was never meant to be read in full. What matters is that it is there open. Honest, unfinished, the Abbey embraces this softness. The way things pause here is not interruption, but invitation. A candle left half burned is not forgotten. It is remembered exactly as it was, held in that fragile moment between glow and shadow. A book left open is not abandoned. It is suspended floating gently between waking and sleep. Tonight, the scholars move slowly. Some sit with books open on their laps, not turning the pages, just holding the weight of them. Others lean against cool stone walls, eyes half closed, letting their thoughts wander further than their reading ever could. No one feels the need to finish. Time, too, has stopped counting. It does not watch the flames, or measure the words. It lingers here, quiet and unspoken, like the dust on forgotten shelves. The Abbey does not worry about what's undone. It only breathes with what is dot near the courtyard. A scholar curls beneath a tapestry, the folds of cloth rising with each breath. Her book has fallen softly from her hands, landing open beside her. The candle at her feet is nearly gone. Its pool of wax reflects the stars through the high window above, stars that blink slowly, like eyes beginning to close. A bell might chime somewhere in the distance. Or maybe it doesn't. It's hard to tell in the stillness. Even sound is allowed to trail off dot. And here, in this hush, the half-finished things shine the brightest. The book that no one closed, the candle that was never snuffed, the thought that stopped mid-sentence and chose, instead, to sleep. Behind the Abbey, past the low stone wall cloaked in moss and age, there lies a garden unlike any other. It is not a grand or manicured place. There are no sculpted hedges or lined pathways. It does not grow in neat rows or boast blossoms of dramatic color. It is a garden of small things, forgotten things, gathered gently over time and allowed to flourish in the quiet. Some call it the Garden of Forgotten Herbs, though no one remembers who named it first. Perhaps the name drifted into being the same way the garden did, without effort, without announcement. It is tended not with tools, but with footsteps, with whispers, and with rest. The air here always carries a scent, not one overpowering or sharp, but a blend of familiar notes. Rosemary warmed by the sun, soft mint stirring in the breeze, chamomile folding gently into the soil. Nothing here shouts. Every leaf and petal seems to breathe slowly, as if inhaling. Dreams and exhaling memory. The garden was not planted all at once. It grew from clippings forgotten on windowsills, seeds carried by the wind, herbs tucked in pockets and never retrieved. Over time, those fragments rooted themselves and stayed. Now, time spreads low across the stone paths. Lavender leans toward the sun, and lemon balm curls beneath the benches. There are benches, yes, old and worn, set in odd corners as if they had wandered there and chosen to stay. One is tilted slightly to the left, held in place by a patch of moss. Another rests beneath an overgrown fig tree whose leaves shade it so perfectly. It's as though time designed it that way. Scholars come here not to study, but to forget what they were studying. They do not bring books or notes. They carry only the weight of the day, and even that begins to lighten once they enter the garden's hush. Some sit and breathe deeply. Some lie back and close their eyes, the scents of sage and hyssop weaving around their dreams. On one such afternoon, though here, afternoons blur easily into evenings, a scholar wrapped in a soft brown robe wandered into the garden with no intention at all. She did not know where she meant to go. Her hands were empty, her mind drowsy with warm thoughts. She paused beside a patch of chamomile and let her fingers trail through the blossoms. They bowed beneath her touch, but did not break dot. She moved slowly toward a stone bench dappled in sunlight, its surface warmed and worn to the shape of resting. As she sat, the wind brushed past her cheek, carrying with it the faintest hint of marjoram. It reminded her of a memory she couldn't name, something about late mornings and open windows. A kind of memory that exists only in feeling, not in words. Nearby, a few scholars lay sleeping beneath a tree, heavy with elderflower. Their heads rested on folded robes. One of them had dropped a handful of dried mint leaves beside his sandal. A bee hovered near, then buzzed away without hurry. Everything here moved in the same slow rhythm, unfolding, like steam from a cup of tea. The herbs had their own kind of order. Mugwort clustered in the shadier corners. Valerian grew low and wide beside the stones, and angelica stood tall along the garden wall, its stems swaying slightly in the breeze. No one trimmed them. No one named them with signs or tags. They simply were growing because they had found a place to do so. A small fountain, almost entirely hidden by creeping lemon thyme, burbled softly in the garden center. Its bowl was shallow, its stone smooth and cool. Water trickled in a gentle spiral, never rushing. Birds visited, sometimes small, quiet ones who dipped their beaks and fluttered away like thoughts escaping sleep. The scholar on the bench leaned back, tilting her head toward the canopy of green above. Dappled light shifted across her face. She did not close her eyes yet. She watched leaves sway, the branches above them bowing gently, as if the trees were exhaling with her. A petal from a white flower drifted down and landed softly on her sleeve. She didn't brush it away. Elsewhere in the garden, another scholar sat cross-legged near a patch of anise hyssop, his eyes barely open. He held a stem between his fingers, rubbing it gently. The scent rose slowly, sweet, earthy, and familiar. He smiled, though he did not know why, and let the stem fall. His body, swaying slightly in the rhythm of the wind, slowly grew still. Time folds in on itself here. Shadows lengthen without warning. The sun does not set so much as it hums lower, dipping into amber tones. No one marks the hours. No bell rings in the herb garden. Even the insects seem to hum more slowly, their sounds blending with the rustle of leaves and the faint trickle of water dot when someone falls asleep in this place. No one wakes them. Sleep is not interruption, it is arrival. A soft settling into. The rhythm the herbs have always known. There is no need for dreams to make sense. In this garden, they grow wild too. The scholar on the bench now lies curled beneath a shawl that was not hers, but had been folded on the bench when she arrived. She breathes slowly, evenly, her hand resting on her chest. A sprig of lavender has landed beside her. She does not move. All around her, the garden breathes. The leaves nod gently. The mint glistens with dew not yet fallen. And the air smells more like sleep than scent. No one counts how many scholars come here. No one names how long they stay. Some leave after an hour, stepping quietly back into the Abbey's soft stone corridors. Others remain through the evening, unmoving except for breath and the small adjustments of a body folding into rest. Eventually, dusk arrives, though gently, as if walking on bare feet. The shadows deepen. The stars begin their quiet climb overhead, though the garden's canopy hides most of them. A few flicker through, caught between leaves like wishes suspended in green. Still, no one moves. Stillness is the only way the garden knows you are there. The Abbey's library stood at the heart of the old stone building, resting in its silence like a sleeping giant. During the day, light filtered through high windows, dust drifting down like slow snow. At night, the space seemed to stretch, its ceilings reaching higher, its shadows deepening into velvet corners. But even in the quietest hours, it was never truly still. Tonight, a wind had found its way in. Not a loud wind, not the kind that moans or whistles. This was the hush of air that slipped past doorframes and danced across wooden floors without sound. It moved like a thought-passing idea. It entered unnoticed, swirled gently beneath the arches, and curled itself among the shelves. The shelves were tall and narrow, carved from wood darkened by centuries. They rose from the floor like trees, and between them the aisles formed winding paths of polished stone. Here, books rested in rows of uneven height, their spines soft with wear. Some leaned on one another, others stood with quiet dignity. None of them moved until the wind passed through. A single page fluttered, just one at first, a loose paper tucked between two volumes. The edge lifted as the wind passed, then settled again without sound. Then another page rustled, one that had been left ajar on a reading table near the center of the room. Its corners tapped lightly against the oak, the sound like the brushing of fingers over silk. The breeze stirred again, winding its way deeper into the library. In a secluded alcove, a window had been left cracked open earlier in the day. No one had thought much of it. The air had been warm then, the scent of thyme and soft rain drifting in. But now, as the night deepened, the cool breath of evening had begun to wander indoors, carrying with it the hush of sleeping gardens and the scent of moss-covered stone. Curtain, faded and thin, swayed gently near the window. It rose and fell like a tide, responding to a rhythm it had always known. The edge of the fabric rushed against the nearby shelf, whispering across the leather bindings, and moved on. The library, for all its quiet, did not resist the wind. It accepted it, welcomed it, allowed it to roam, to lift dust from corners, to stir the ends of forgotten scrolls. In the high rafters, the breeze caused a faint creak from the old beams. Not ominous, not sudden, just the sound of wood remembering its age. On a cushion beside one low table, a scholar slept with his head resting on his folded arms. A book lay open in front of him, its pages stilled in mid-thought. As the wind passed, the pages lifted slightly, then dropped. The movement did not wake him. If anything, it seemed to deepen his sleep, like a lullaby written in motion rather than sound. The wind continued, slow and unbothered, brushing past lamps that had long since burned out. Wax puddles glistened faintly in the starlight, slipping through the window. A single feather, caught between two books, lifted into the air for just a moment, then settled again in a new place, somewhere near the back of the library, where the oldest volumes rested on low wooden carts. The air caught the edge of a scroll left unrolled. It curled just slightly at the corner, revealing a glimpse of ink symbols drawn in a hand that no one had read in centuries. The breeze touched the ink and moved on, like a reader pausing but choosing not to linger. On the floor, near the central reading table, a candle had burned itself out hours ago, its wick curved like a question mark. The breeze passed over the cooled wax, stirring its surface as if testing whether it might still hold warmth. It did not. But it held memory. The sound of the wind among the bookshelves was soft, more felt than heard. It moved like the brushing of robes, the swish of breath, the memory of voices never raised. For those still awake in the Abbey, it brought a kind of comfort, a reminder that nothing was truly still, even in rest. Along the back wall, near the narrow stair that led to the scriptorium, an archway framed a cluster of shelves filled with books no longer catalogued. Their bindings were cracked, their titles half erased. No one had read them in some time. But the wind found them. It slipped through their pages, stirring the dust that settled in their spines, letting them breathe once more. A scholar stood quietly in this alcove, not reading, not moving. He had come not to find a book, but to be near them, to listen, to feel the slow rhythm of pages shifting in the wind. His hands were tucked in his sleeves, and his breath moved in time with the soft rustle of paper and the low creaks of old shelves. He closed his eyes, and even with them closed, he could see it, the shape of the library as it breathed. The way. The wind carved paths through its corridors, how the air rose and fell around each volume like a tide washing over stones. The books, though unread, hummed with presence, each one a vessel of words asleep. Somewhere another page turned. Just one. Gently, as if guided by an invisible hand. No one would mark the place or ask what was read. Here, the library did not demand purpose. It offered space, for rest, for thought, for the wind to wander, and the mind to follow behind, unhurried and unbound. Near the entrance, where the threshold met the cold stone hall, the wind began to fade. It had traced its path through the stacks, stirred the corners of parchment, and sung softly through the spines. Now its breath grew fainter, like a lullaby finishing its last note. And as it drifted away, the library settled once more into stillness. Not silence, but rest. The pages that had lifted now lay flat. The curtains stopped their dance. The feather no longer moved. But everything it had touched remained changed, just slightly. A little softer. A little more aware of the night that wrapped gently around the Abbey's walls. Here, among the books and the shelves, the breeze had passed and left behind only calm. In the dimmest wing of the Abbey, behind a narrow archway, where ivy had started to trace its fingers along the stone, there stood a small, square chamber where the air moved differently. It was neither cold nor warm, but carried the faint scent of parchment, old wood, and forgotten thoughts. Light barely reached this place, except for a few filtered hours each afternoon, when the sun slipped through a high-arched window, drawing slow-moving shapes onto the tiled floor. There, in the center of the room, Saturday, a desk unassuming in shape, worn by time, the surface slightly bowed in the middle, where elbows had rested for years. It had not been polished in recent memory, nor dusted with any particular care. A soft coat of dust rested along its corners, not thick, but settled, as if no one had the heart to disturb it. This was the desk of a scholar who, according to whispered habit and gentle memory, never finished a sentence. On the desk were sheets of parchment, some tucked into neat stacks, others resting at odd angles, caught in the act of being written, and then paused forever. No page carried a complete thought. All bore openings lines that started with clarity and promise, but slowed into empty space, the ink ending mid-curve, as though the hand had wandered elsewhere. Some sentences were almost poetic in their hesitation, others fragmentary, drifting into silence without punctuation. A quiet room filled with things that were not quite said. It was not disorderly. Everything remained in place, exactly as it had been left. The ink had not smudged. The quill remained in its holder, beside a small bottle, where the ink had dried to a thin ring around the bottom. A candle stub stood nearby, burnt to half its length. Its wick, leaning gently like it too, had fallen asleep while waiting. This particular scholar, whose name was no longer spoken, if it had ever truly mattered, was not remembered for works completed or treatises compiled. His memory persisted, instead, in the rhythm of gentle beginnings. He had filled entire volumes with openings, reflections that fluttered at the edge of articulation, and then simply rested. A life of writing that asked nothing of itself, content to drift where it pleased. The room itself had conformed to this nature. It was quiet, but not empty. The shelves were low and filled with parchment rolls tied with faded ribbons, and notebooks of varying sizes, none of them labeled. They were rarely touched. Occasionally, a curious scholar would pull one out, flip gently through the pages, and find the same gentle pattern, thoughts suspended in time, their ends left to dissolve softly into the white space that followed. Sunlight moved slowly across the wall, brushing over the stone with the same pace that the scholar had once written. A breeze wandered in from the upper window, curling faintly around the desk, lifting the edges of a few loose papers before letting them fall again with no rush. The movement was so subtle, it was more like the breath of the room than wind. On the far wall hung a modest tapestry, its colors dulled to shades of ash, slate, and faint moss. It bore no figures or crests, only soft gradations of texture that seemed to echo the scholar's sentences. It did not tell a story. It suggested a space in which a story might someday appear, or perhaps never would. There was a drawer built into the desk, half open, creaking slightly if nudged. Within it lay more notes, folded scraps of vellum, and thin slivers of parchment that looked as though they had once been torn from larger thoughts. These, too, bore fragments ideas that had been born in full attention, then allowed to wander. The room carried no urgency. It made no demands. There was no need here to reach a conclusion. The Abbey had long known this place. It had folded the room into its rhythm like a pocket of breath. It had allowed it to remain untouched. Over time, other scholars had found their way here, not out of purpose, but out of gentle curiosity. Some stayed a while, sitting at the desk, in silence, their hands brushing lightly over the old wood. A few picked up the quill, dipped it in ink, and left behind a sentence of their own unfinished, naturally. On the floor, near the leg of the desk, a small woven cushion lay slightly flattened, suggesting someone had once sat there in stillness, for longer than they meant to. In the corner, a rolled blanket rested against the wall, perhaps forgotten, or perhaps left for those who came after. The scholar's chamber did not keep time. It only offered space. Outside the chamber, life in. The Abbey moved at its usual pace. Bells marked the hours. Sandals passed along stone corridors. Pages turned in brighter rooms. But here, none of that urgency arrived. The silence inside this place was not a lack of sound, but a kind of fullness. It held space for all the words that didn't need to be said. By late afternoon, the light shifted again. Shadows of window frames reached longer across the walls. Dust floated in slow spirals. The parchment remained unmoved. Even the wind seemed to pause here, reluctant to interrupt. This was not a space to fill, but a place to feel. Some said that to enter this room was to understand a new rhythm, not of writing, but of resting. To learn that a thought, once begun, did not owe the world its conclusion. That the act of beginning was, in itself, a kind of grace. The scholar had lived by this, his work now breathing through the stillness he had left behind. Nothing in this chamber changed, and yet, for those who lingered, everything softened. At the farthest end of the Abbey, where the ceilings bowed low and the air thickened with age, sat the archive, a room that did not welcome visitors so much as it absorbed them. The stone arch that marked its entrance was worn smooth at the edges, touched by centuries of hesitant hands. No sign announced its name. It was simply understood that this was the place where memory came to rest. The archive was older than the Abbey's library. Its wooden shelves were rougher, darker, and uneven in height. They leaned into one another like sleepy companions, each. One bowed beneath the weight of scrolls, ledgers, and handwritten records no longer needed by the present. There was no system here, no catalogue or clerk to manage the collection. The archive kept its own time, and its order was one known only to the space itself, not in a corner where the light from the single high window spilled like faded parchment. Across the floor, a small wooden chair sat tucked beside a thick-legged table. The table's surface was cluttered with open books, a few stacked in teetering towers, and others left mid-spread, their pages gently curling at the corners. Thin strips of vellum marked places long forgotten. Dust softened every edge, and silence curled between the layers like smoke dot. It was in this room that one of the Abbey's oldest scholars had made a quiet home. No one recalled when he had begun spending his hours there. It had started gradually, they said, a day here, then a week. Eventually, the scholar had simply remained, as though he had slipped gently into the archive's rhythm and allowed it to absorb him. He never moved quickly. His steps were soft, deliberate. He would walk between the shelves with his hands tucked behind his back, pausing to look at something no one else could see. Occasionally, he would run a finger along the spine of a volume, lift the edge of a forgotten page, and then let it fall again without a sound. His presence did not disturb the room. It merely settled into it, like another piece of the collection. A small woven blanket had been draped over the back of the chair. Its threads had frayed at the edges, softened by years of use. A feather pillow, slightly flattened, rested on the seat. In colder months, a cushion had been placed on the floor nearby, in case the scholar preferred to lie down. Over time, the archive had adjusted itself around him. Scrolls were moved to make room. A low shelf became a footrest. An unused drawer held folded linen. The scholar's days were spent in quiet repetition reading, pausing, sometimes writing a few lines before setting the pen down and closing his eyes. The light would shift around him as the hours passed, casting shadows across the table that crept along the floor like slow water. He did not measure time in chapters or bells, but in the turn of dust, the warmth of sunlight, the softening of parchment dot, and then, one afternoon, he simply stayed asleep. No one noticed at first. He had always been still when resting, his breath shallow, his body unmoving. The rhythm of his days had included long pauses, quiet naps, and the absence of urgency. When a novice arrived to deliver fresh ink and paper, he found the scholar resting at the table, his head gently resting on his folded arms, a half-rolled scroll near his hand. The candle beside him had burned to the base. The novice left the supplies nearby and did not wake him. Days passed. The scholar remained in the same position, his expression unchanged. The room held him as it always had, cradling him in its silence. Word spread softly through the Abbey, not with alarm, but with a kind of reverence. The scholar had begun the longest nap the archive had ever known. No one disturbed the space. A few came to sit quietly nearby, their presence more like shadows. And visitors. They read, they rested, and then they left again, their footsteps soft against the stone floor. The archive accepted them all, but asked for nothing. Outside, the seasons shifted. The leaves turned, then fell. Snow crept against the windows. Rain tapped gently on the roof tiles. Light shifted across the walls with each passing day, but the center of the room remained unchanged, warm, still, and timeless. The Abbey never removed the scholar's things. His blanket remained on the chair. His books stayed open. A teacup, long emptied, still rested on a nearby shelf, its rim dusted with a fine layer of time. The archive preserved everything not by freezing it, but by letting it drift slowly, gently, into quiet. No candle was needed to keep watch. The archive glowed with a soft, internal light, a hush that was not quite silence, a stillness that welcomed the breath between thoughts. The scholar's nap was not marked by sadness. It was simply an extension of his routine, the natural lengthening of his peaceful rhythm. Eventually, the space became part of the Abbey's unspoken wisdom. When a scholar sought deep rest, or wished to let go of thought entirely, they would find their way there. Some sat in his chair, others laid a cushion on the floor. No one ever stayed long, just long enough to feel the pace of the archive settle into them. In time, it was said that the archive remembered everyone who visited, that the wood of the shelves grew warm with the thoughts left behind, and that the pages rustled softly whenever a new presence entered, not to warn, but to welcome. The room remained unchanged, but full, and the scholar, still asleep in memory, if not in body, was at the heart of it all. The longest nap, perhaps, was not measured in days or decades. Perhaps it was simply the kind of rest that goes so deep it becomes part of the place itself. A stillness that did not need to end. Here, where ink no longer dried and candles no longer burned, rest had no boundary, and sleep, like dust, had gently settled across every surface, binding time into something softer than memory, something that whispered but never asked to be heard. Somewhere between late afternoon and the earliest edge of dusk, the Abbey would soften. It wasn't just the change in light, or the hush of turning pages, or the distant echo of sandals across worn stone. It was something gentler than that. A kind of settling. The air would still, and even the breeze that whispered through the corridors would grow quieter, as if it too felt the weight of the hour and longed to rest. In that time, all across the Abbey, everything slowed just slightly. Scrolls were closed, not with urgency, but with care. Cups were placed back into their wooden trays. Pens were laid down, left beside inkwells with their lids resting ajar. No one hurried to finish thoughts or complete sentences. The work of the day, such as it was, faded into the soft rhythm of breath. It was in these hours that the oldest scholar, the one who had long ago surrendered to the archive's stillness, would become part of the story of the entire Abbey, not as a figure to be remembered, but as a presence woven into the walls. The nap he had taken so long, so quiet, had become a metaphor for the Abbey itself. Not an ending, not a loss. A deep breath held just a little longer than usual. The archive itself, though filled with the weight of written things, seemed lighter now, as if the scholar's peaceful presence had softened even the oldest bindings. The pages no longer rustled in protest when touched. The dust no longer clung, but shimmered faintly in the angled sunlight. The room had become, over time, a place not just for memory, but for dreams unspoken. Outside, the garden lay still. The branches swayed without wind. The herbs, lavender, mint, rosemary, gave off the faintest perfume as the sun settled just above the hills, casting a golden tone that seemed to hum against the stone. No bells rang at this hour. This time was left unmarked on purpose. It did not belong to clocks. Within the walls of the Abbey, the final light of day traveled like a ribbon through the spaces where words once were. It touched the desk in the deal, scholar's alcove, where half-sentences still curled at the edges. It warmed the cushions beneath library windows, where tired scholars had dozed mid-line. It passed over the Cloister garden, where benches remembered the weight of thoughtful bodies leaning back, eyelids growing heavy under the spell of sunlight and distant birdsong. The final afternoon nap did not take place in any one room. It unfolded slowly across the entire Abbey, as if every stone, every book, every breath had agreed to rest. The scholars, young and old, did not resist. One by one, they found quiet corners to lean into. Some rested beside books, some beneath the low archways, where candlelight trembled, some by windows, their eyes watching clouds, until even the clouds began to drift slower. The Abbey, in its centuries of stillness, had always known how to make space for silence. But this silence was something deeper, not the hush between sounds, but the kind that carried weight, the kind that wrapped gently around everything and asked nothing in return. In the tea room beneath the library, a teapot had been left warm on the table. 2 cups beside it waited, not to be filled, but simply to be. A chair had been pulled away from the table just slightly, its cushion showing the faint imprint of someone who had risen slowly and never returned. The scent of dried chamomile lingered, almost invisible, like a thought not yet spoken aloud. In the corridor of quiet footsteps, nothing stirred. The arches cast long shadows across the stone floor, and even the candles seemed to burn lower, slower, as if the wax itself was reluctant to disappear. The stained glass caught the last colors of the day and held them a moment longer, just for the walls to remember. The nap did not announce itself. It simply arrived, first in the slow blink of an eye, then in the lowering of a head, and finally in the deep, long stillness of breath growing deeper. There were no dreams to be remembered afterward, only the sense that, for a little while, everything had been allowed to rest, truly rest. The Abbey sighed, not in sadness, but in completion, in stillness fulfilled. And now, dear listener, the Abbey is quiet once more. The candles have dimmed to a low, gentle glow. The last beams of sunlight have dissolved into dusk, and even the pages have stopped turning. The garden has folded into the arms of twilight, and the wind no longer brushes the herbs. It simply lingers. The scholars, all of them, are asleep. Some have dozed beside parchment and quill, others beneath windows of starlight. The ink has dried mid-thought. The tea has cooled. The blankets have drawn themselves closer around resting shoulders. And somewhere in the archive, the old scholar remains still, peaceful, eternal in his dreaming. Not gone, simply paused in a moment that stretches on like a lullaby. Even the walls breathe slower now. The stone feels warmer, not with heat, but with the memory of presence. The hush that has settled across the Abbey is not empty. It is full of everything that does not need to be said, full of beginnings that never needed endings, full of words that were meant only to be felt. So now it's your turn to rest. Let go of the day, the thoughts, the weight of sentences unfinished. There's nothing more to carry tonight. Just the soft breath of old wood, the quiet sigh of pages at rest, and the lull of dreams that ask for nothing but time. Close your eyes. Breathe, feel the stillness gather around you like a candlelit blanket, and as the final bell never rings, let yourself drift into your own quiet nap, where words rest, dreams begin. Good night, dear listener. Sleep well, and we'll see you again next time.